Expectations. Expectations, goodness. Expectations can be blinding. Expectations can distort what is right in front of us. Expectations can cause confusion. It can cause frustration. Expectations can even birth betrayal or lashing out or acting in ways we never would have even expected of ourselves. Expectations are blinding, which is one of the reasons why it is so important for us to calibrate our expectations. Matthew chapter 16 has always been a passage I found so intriguing. Because Jesus is there with his disciples. He's already done incredible things to all of these different crowds. And Jesus then finally asks his disciples an identity question. Specifically, Jesus asks them, "Who do people say that I am?" And oh goodness, the disciples start listing all kinds of options. Well, I don't know. Some of them say that you're John the Baptist, and some say that you're Elijah, and some say Jeremiah, and some say the prophets. And finally, Jesus is like, all right. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And this is one of those moments where Peter opens his fat mouth and says something beautiful. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 16, Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And in Matthew 16, 17, Jesus replies, he's like, "Oh my goodness, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. This wasn't revealed to you by man. No, my identity was revealed to you by God himself." And then Jesus even takes it up a notch. He goes, "You know what? You're no longer going to be called Simon. I'm calling you Peter. And on this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." And then things start to get a little awkward. You see, just a couple of verses later, verse 21, Jesus starts to talk about the fact that as the Christ, as the Messiah, he would be executed, betrayed, handed over, tortured, even crucified. And this sets Peter off. I mean, Peter in verse 22 has the audacity to pull Jesus aside and rebuke him. Verse 22 says, "Never, Lord, you are wrong. This shall never happen to you." What in the world is going on in Peter's mind? Like, what would possess Peter to not only challenge what Jesus has said about himself, but to rebuke him for even saying it? Answer? Expectations. You see, what was going through Peter's mind is what would have been going through the rest of the disciples' mind. What would have been going through the minds of the Jewish people. That when the Messiah comes, they expected it was the Messiah's responsibility to destroy the enemies, to wipe out the enemies. The Messiah wasn't supposed to come and receive pain. The Messiah was going to give pain. The Messiah wasn't supposed to be crucified. The Messiah was supposed to be the crucifier. There was an expectation of what the Messiah must do when he came, and the expectation was so strong that even when Jesus revealed who he was to his disciples, they could not hear it. They could not see it. They even had the audacity to rebuke him. And finally, Jesus, in verse 23 of Matthew 16, just lets Peter have it, and he yells, "Get behind me, Satan." Because Jesus saw it as another temptation, a temptation to be someone he was not. Here's the point. Expectations can be blinding. Expectations can actually obscure the message and the people, the messenger that are right in front of us. And so it is absolutely essential for us to calibrate our expectations. And this isn't just something about the Messiah. We need to make sure our expectations match or are calibrated for our children. Don't expect your 4-year-old to act like a 14-year-old. I mean, don't expect your baby to not cry in the middle of a worship service. Calibrate your expectation. Don't expect your boss to be perfect. Calibrate your expectations, even of God. Don't expect him to be some cosmic Santa Claus in the sky. Expectations can be blinding, and so the best thing we can do is to challenge our expectations and calibrate them. Even when it comes to evil, we need to understand and to calibrate our expectations of evil. This is going to be similar. What happens here in Daniel 8 is similar to what we saw in Daniel chapter 2, where in Daniel chapter 2, we saw this unveiling of evil, that this is how evil acts, that this is who evil is, that you can expect evil to do certain things because that's their identity, and action flows from identity. And here in Daniel 8, the calibration of our expectations of evil can be summarized with this: evil destroys, now this is where it gets weird, evil destroys their own. You can expect this of evil. You can expect that evil destroys their own. Why? Because that's who evil is. That's what evil does. And if you calibrate your expectations, then you will not be blinded. You will not be obscured. You will not falsely understand what is happening to you when you are confronted with and by evil. Daniel chapter 8, verse 1 begins with Daniel announcing once again that he had a vision. Like Daniel 7, he says, I had a vision, not Nebuchadnezzar, not another king, me. But he connects this vision in Daniel 8 to the vision in Daniel 7. This is what he says in verse 1. In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision after the one that had already appeared to me. He's saying, remember Daniel 7? This one in Daniel 8 starts to unfold some of the images we saw there. In verse 2, he gives us a location where in his vision, he finds himself in Persia. Now, if you remember from the previous episode, the previous session, we saw that the first beast that looked like a lion was Babylon, and the second beast that looked like a bear was Medo-Persia. That's where he finds himself in this vision, in the land of the second beast. So Daniel is in this place when all of a sudden, he starts to see coming out of the mist, out of this moment, verse 3, a ram. And this ram is coming, and it has this emphasis on two. There are 2 horns. One is longer than the other one. Now, remember, don't get distracted. Don't get lost. The images are weird, but you can hang with us. We're going somewhere together. He's in Persia, he sees a ram, and there is this longer horn than the other one. The longer horn and the other one represents Medo-Persian alliance. This is actually what Gabriel in verse 20 interprets the image to be. He says, this is the Medo-Persian alliance. Here's where it gets interesting. In verse 5, Daniel starts to notice another animal charging at the ram. It's a goat. It's a goat, and it has this, very distinct horn, but the emphasis of the goat is rapidity, how quick it goes. You have words like suddenly and crossing the whole earth and not even touching the ground. There is this rapid movement of this beast. And once again, in verse 21, Gabriel, the messenger of God, interprets who this goat is. It's the 3rd beast from Daniel 7. The Greek Empire. And if you know anything about the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great basically conquers the known world at the time in a period of about 10 to 13 years. I mean, it is rapid. And you see this movement where this goat comes on the scene, and what does it do? It attacks and tramples the ram. Remember, don't get distracted. Don't get distracted. And don't forget, we're still talking about the same thing we've been talking about for the first 7 chapters. Identity. Because what this vision unveils is not just this amazing prediction about what's going to happen in future kingdoms, the Medo-Persian Empire and the Greek Empire. No, what's unveiled is the character, the identity, the true nature of evil. Because think about this. The ram, the Medo-Persian Empire, was an evil empire. And who destroys the evil empire? The goat, another evil empire. Why? Because evil destroys their own. That's who evil is. Even if you are one that has dedicated yourself to the ways and to the kingdom of evil, this is what you can expect. Evil will destroy you. Because that's who evil is. That's what it does. Like we saw in Daniel chapter 7, how evil attacks and defeats and destroys the people of God, the good. But in Daniel 8, it says, now listen, evil doesn't just attack the good. Evil attacks evil. Evil even, this is crazy, evil attacks itself. And that's what we see happening with the goat and how it starts to unfold the imagery in verses 8 and following. You see, when Alexander the Great dies, this is referenced in verse 22 by Gabriel. When Alexander the Great dies, you have 4 generals that take over his kingdom. And that's the 4 horns that replaces the 1 horn on this goat. And the 4 generals, they take over, but they had no intention of ruling together in unity. No. Why? Because that's not who evil is. Without question and without delay, the 4 generals start to fight each other. Greeks fighting Greeks to reign the Greek Empire. And eventually, and you see this come out in verses 11 through 12, eventually, there only remained 1 general. And this general had not only destroyed evil, this general had destroyed himself, and now evil turns its attention to fighting God. That's how arrogant evil gets. It doesn't just use its power to destroy the good. It doesn't just use its power to assault and to attack other evil, even itself. Eventually, it uses its power to attack God. And in verses 11 through 12, you see that he is outlawing sacrifices and that there is no worship of God. Now, don't get distracted. Here is what we're trying to do. We're trying to calibrate our expectations. So let me be very clear. Evil does not give life. Evil destroys. And that is what you can expect from evil every time you encounter it. Evil does not give life. Evil destroys. It's who it is, and actions flow from identity. You should not be shocked then. Whenever you grab the tools of evil and you use them to try to accomplish good, and all it does is create more destruction. And you should also not be surprised if you bow your knee to evil, if you ingest the fruit of evil, that you become an agent of destruction yourself. That you become one that doesn't just destroy the good, but you destroy even those that are a part of the evil, that you even destroy yourself. There's a reason why. Throughout the Bible, whenever you see people that are dedicated to other gods, they do things like cut themselves. So think of 1 Kings 18 with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, and Elijah is there, and they're having a contest of whose God can provide the fire on the altar. And at one point, the priests of Baal, they start cutting themselves with swords. Because that's how you worship evil, because that's who you are. Or take the Gerasene demoniac in Mark chapter 5. We find him in a cemetery, all alone, isolated, broken chains, and cutting himself with potsherds. When you bow your knee to evil, don't be surprised when you do things that ultimately end in the destruction of the good, of other evil, even of yourself. We need to calibrate our expectations, because if we have expectations that we hold on to so tightly, we can become blinded. Like Peter, who doesn't just rebuke Jesus. No, Peter's expectations led him to the point where he denies even knowing Jesus. Or the expectations of Judas, which led him to kiss the Savior of the world on the cheek, handing him over to the enemy to be destroyed. Expectations are blinding. And it is essential. It is absolutely essential for us to heed what Daniel 8 is unveiling, what we can expect of evil. Evil destroys. Evil destroys even their own. And if you bow the knee to evil, that is who you will become, because that's who evil is.